So let's take a look at what you get in the box of Guns of August. Of course, you get the beautiful box designed by artist Sean Cook, a sheet and a half of die-cut double-sided cardboard counters, 5/8 inch counters. Get a two-piece map depicting Western Europe, France, Belgium, and Luxembourg specifically. You see the game here set up in the middle of a personal play. Get two play aid cards, six-sided dice, and it's a grand total of 8 pages of color rules, of which the last two are three extra scenarios. You get one for the Battle of the Mons, one for the Marne, the French counterattack. I always have a hard time pronouncing this. Ypres, Y-P-R-E-S. And it's actually 6 pages of actual game rules. We're going to talk real quick about the map, counters, and how to perform combat. Map's a 22 by 34 two-piece portrayal of Western Europe, including France, Belgium to the north, Luxembourg in the center, and Germany to the east. Hexagons control movement and combat. There's various terrain, forest, rivers, national boundaries, a dotted black line, mountains, named locations, fortresses, which will have hexes, counters placed on them, railroads, which are important for supply and rail movement, and that is pretty much it for the map. Different terrain on the board costs different movement point cost, which is covered under movement. The counters, we're going to discuss the counters real quick. Located on each counter are 2 numbers and a figure. The figure represents what kind of unit it is. If it's an infantry figure, obviously it's an infantry. If it has a horse figure on it, it's a cavalry unit. If it has a star on it, it's a fortress piece. And if it doesn't have a infantry or cavalry or star piece, but rather a national flag, it's a headquarters. The units are color-coded to match their headquarters unit. This is General Ruffy of the French Third Army. He has a red box around his artillery score, which is the score to the left. Infantry rifle score is the score to the right. All the units in the French Third Army have red boxes around their artillery score. When their chit's drawn, they may be activated for combat and movement. As you can see here, the French Second Army has a black box, the French Sixth Army has a green box. You have a command chit for the Belgian Army, the various German armies, the French armies, and the British Army. That pretty much explains the units. Combat's fairly simple. You have 2 combats in each combat, basically. A artillery combat and a rifle combat. And this happens when units are adjacent and the player decides to attack. Combat is not mandatory. So we're going to say this German infantry was in a hex attacking these 2 defending French units that were both in the same hex. You total the artillery score. The German has a 5. The French have a 3 and a 1 for a total of 4. You look at the the artillery table. Under the 1-to-1, the German player would roll a dice. If the result is 0, nothing happens. If the result is an S, it causes a shift of 1 column to the right on the rifle table. If it's a S1, the defending unit takes a step loss and the column is still shifted 1 to the right. So let's say the German on this had a 1-to-1, he rolled a 5. So it shifts it 1 to the right for a suppressed result. Then you look at the rifle score. 4, and the French is a 4 and a 1, making it a 5. 4 attacking 5 is 1 to 2 odds. The German player then shifts it 1 to the right due to the suppression result. If it hadn't been suppressed, it would stay on the 1 to 2 chart. German player rolls a dice and applies the results. The results are either a step loss, left number being the attacker, right number being the defender, of either a 0 or 1 or a 2. So if you rolled a 1, the German would take 2 step losses, the French defender 0. The E, you put an exhaustion marker on any one defending unit determined by the other player. The other player is the player who chooses which unit your loss is applied to on your units. That pretty much explains combat. You have terrain modifiers and other modifiers. You can read the rules and find all that. I'm giving you a quick down on dirty on how to play. Okay, it's now time to talk sequence of play and chit pull. Sequence of play is pretty straightforward. As the first part of the player's turn, you get replacements and reinforcements if any are available. If not, you go to a chit phase. For each army on the board, you place a chit for that army inside a cup, at which point you draw the chit. Here I've drawn the French Fifth Army. You find the French Fifth Army on the board. Again, the blue for the French Fifth Army corresponds to the blue around the artillery scores for the units on board. Those units then move and they perform combat. After that, you draw the next chit. Once all the chits have been pulled, you do a small administration of removing any exhaustion markers from any units that are not adjacent to enemy units, at which point the cup gets refilled, the turn marker moved to one ahead, and you start your next sequence for the next turn. We're now going to talk activation and movement. Once an army is activated by the draw of their chit, any and all movements in that army can move. Units have a set movement point score. Fortress can move 0, infantry and headquarters 5, cavalry costs have a movement point allowance of 7. Different terrain costs different movement points. Clear terrain in any hex side crossed by a rail line is 1. Crossing a river or entering a forest hex without a rail line costs 2, and it has to be from rail line to rail line, so from here to here is 1, but from here to here is 2. Entering a hex in an enemy zone of confusion, regardless of rail line presence, costs 2. Something I forgot to mention in the counters, but it applies more to movement, is only units with 3 X's at the top have a zone of confusion. Those are your core size units. You can have up to 9 X's in a hex. That's it, per side. 9 X's in a hex. Entering a mountain hex costs 5, and entering any other hex costs 1. Movement point costs are not cumulative. So for a German cavalry unit to cross the river, 1, 2, 3, it would not be 5. It's not 2 to cross the river and then 2 to enter enemy zone of confusion. It's a total of 2, whatever's the highest to enter in that hex. That pretty much explains movement. We're going to talk supply and rail movement real quick. For a unit to be in supply for the German army, it has to be within 3 hexes of a rail line leading to either Saarbrücken or Aachen up to the north, or within 3 hexes of a headquarter units to that which that corps belonged to, and then that headquarters has to be within 3 hexes of a rail line. For the French, for the Allies, it has to lead to Paris, Calais along the coast, Nancy, and 1 or 2 others. I don't have it right here in front of me. For rail movement, starting on turn 9, each player can move 1 unit per turn from a named location to another controlled friendly named location along any distance of rail lines. It does not have to be friendly controlled rail lines. They can be enemy controlled. You just can't enter a hex with an enemy unit. The same thing for the rail line for supply. It can be enemy controlled. It just can't have an enemy unit in it. If a unit is found to be out of supply at the start of movement or of its combat, you don't check the defender supply, you check the attackers, then it's marked with a exhaustion marker. Pretty much explains the game quickly and I hope sufficiently to get your interest. I'm Grant Wiley, signing out from Worthington Games. Happy gaming, and hope to be back with Band of Brothers as our next How to Play.